What do you get for the man who has everything? A simple question that speaks to preconceived notions of Superman. That he's perfect, that he has no human needs, that he's elevated to a degree both morally and physically as to be completely unrelatable to the common reader. That's all, of course, not true. But it's a question that lies at the center of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' 1985 story For the Man Who Has Everything, originally published in Superman Annual number 11. And while it's a standalone story that doesn't work to set up a bigger narrative or forever alter the character of Superman, its impact and legacy are enormous. The story sees Wonder Woman, Batman, and Robin, a still new Jason Todd trying to think clean thoughts, visit Superman at his Fortress of Solitude to celebrate his birthday. But any concerns about whether their gifts will be right for a man that seemingly has everything are pushed aside when they find the Man of Steel comatose, with an alien plant burrowed into his chest. What follows is a two-sided tale of emotional and physical battle that tests Superman and his fellow heroes. A story of desire, loss, and friendship. And for all its dark undertones, one that ultimately celebrates the Man of Steel as someone wonderfully, inspirationally human. In the end, the question isn't what to get for the man who has everything, but what he can never truly have. By 1985, Alan Moore had already been making a name for himself in and out of DC Comics with the Dark Miracle Man and the revisionist Swamp Thing. While it wouldn't be long until Moore and collaborator Dave Gibbons would shake the industry with Watchmen, they were given their first chance at collaboration on a Superman annual by editor Julius Schwartz. In turn, the pair would create an enormous challenge for the Man of Steel. The question posed by the story's title may concern what you could ever give to someone like Superman, but its main narrative thrust centers on what you could possibly do to defeat someone with the powers of a god. Soon after discovering the comatose Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Robin encounter Mongol, an alien despot hell-bent on destroying Superman after being thwarted by him multiple times. A titanic brawl ensues between Mongol and Wonder Woman, gamely stepping up to a far larger opponent and using every nearby weapon to damage the seemingly invincible brute, as the dynamic duo try to free Superman from the alien plant known as the Black Mercy. Mongol, ever the gloater, reveals that the Black Mercy lives by feeding on its victims' life force, while telepathically understanding their heart's greatest desire and letting them live it out in their minds to keep them comatose. Here, Moore cuts between the real-world battle and Superman's fantasy, with Gibbons using a red border to differentiate the illusion on the page. But if the Black Mercy gives its victims an illusion of their heart's deepest desire, what does Superman want that he can't have? The answer is life on a Krypton that was never destroyed. That realization itself is heartbreaking, and it speaks to a desire that can never be fulfilled by a hero that seems to have the world on a string. We soon see that in this fantasy, Kal-El is happily married to Lila Lerol and has 2 children. But what at first seems like an idyllic alternate history for Krypton soon turns sour. The idea that Superman's ultimate fantasy would be that Krypton was never destroyed, giving him the opportunity to raise a family and connect with the parents he never knew, says a lot about what Moore thinks of Kal-El's alien nature versus human nurture balance. For all the good he's done and lives he's saved, there's something in Superman that wishes for a normal life. But more important is that even in Superman's wildest fantasy, a living Krypton is simply wrong. The Krypton of Superman's heritage, doomed and short-sighted as it may have been, is also permanently cast in an idyllic glow. A great fallen society that our world may never reach. One that never lived to be torn apart politically or to see its people ultimately cast into societal chaos. Simply put, the Krypton of the Black Mercy vision is wrong. And while this may be a fantasy, not even the Black Mercy can prevent Superman from reaching that logical endpoint. The idea behind the story was to examine the concept of escapism and fantasy dream worlds, said Moore, including happy times in the past that we look back on and idealize, and longed for points in the imagined future when we will finally achieve whatever our goals happen to be. I wanted to have a look at how useful these ideas actually are, and how wide the gap is between the fantasy and any sort of credible reality. Even more heartbreaking for the hero than seeing his father disgraced for believing the planet was about to die, or his homeworld torn apart, is being forced to reject the family he's created in this world. As Kal-El realizes that everything around him is wrong, he drives out into the barren land where Kandor once stood with his son Van-El and faces the truth. Krypton is dead. His family never existed, and the life he's living must be rejected for the sake of the greater good.
Van, it's It's this feeling. Oh, dear Rao. Am I going mad? I keep thinking that... Van, please. I know this won't make sense, but you're my son. I was there at your birth, and I'll always love you. Always. But Van, I don't think you're real.
This is the deepest cut of Mongol's attack. Van-El might not be real, but he's fictional within a fictional story. These characters matter to us as readers because we give them life and meaning. By having Superman realize the unreality of his own son and be forced to reject him, he becomes a little more like us. The reader grown deeply emotionally bonded to someone that never existed and now forced to face their permanent separation. To quote Moore's other Superman story, "This is an imaginary story. Aren't they all?" The reason that Superman has resonated across generations is because he's imbued with meaning that grows deeper as each writer and each reader brings him to life in their mind. Kal-El's Black Mercy family was given life through his imagination and greatest desires. To this fictional character, they were as real as he is. While Moore only ever wrote a handful of Superman stories, each highly influential in the history of the character, a huge amount of the author's work exists as commentary on the concept and history of the Man of Steel. The God meets man of Miracle Man, the mythic recreation of Supreme, the inhuman detachment of Dr. Manhattan, a revision of Captain Atom, but the iconic line of "The Superman exists and he's American" places him within this larger conversation. All of these recontextualize and critique the Superman archetype, often spelling disaster for the world at large when forced to live with a person with godlike powers. But Moore's work on Superman himself exists within the awkward yet limitless nexus of pre- and post-crisis DC, a redefining collision of the smiling sun god of the Silver Age and the heavy-shouldered Man of Steel of the Bronze Age. While his non-DC reinterpretations of the character may be Nietzschean, Moore's Superman is far from the Ubermensch. For all his late-period disillusionment with superheroes, Moore's DC work, notably before his Watchmen-caused enmity toward the publisher, is a full-hearted embrace of Clark Kent, and the hope and fury of For the Man speaks directly to this view, as Batman wrenches the Black Mercy off Superman's chest, only possible because of Clark's growing rejection of the fantasy. Krypton, for all its good and bad, disintegrates. The Black Mercy's living Krypton was a false premise, one that was consistent within its own internal logic, but inherently wrong. The entirety of its world must be rejected, but doing so means everything wonderful about it must be thrown out with the bad. The Black Mercy is designed to give its victim a vision of its heart's greatest desire to keep them placid as it feeds. And as we see in its effect on Batman and Mongol later, there's no real catch to these illusions. So why is Superman's dream inherently flawed? Shouldn't this vision of the planet be filled with happiness and peace, and not social unrest and a growing sense of dread? In this, Moore embeds a deep sense of survivor's guilt into Kal-El, an idea he would double down on in his hallucinogenic DC Comics Presents with Swamp Thing, that collides Superman with the muck-encrusted mockery of a man. Krypton's destruction is inextricable from Superman's entire life. Metatextually, there can be no Superman story without the tragedy of his origins. Anything other than this simply feels wrong. While Moore never spells it out for us, years of life have been suddenly implanted in Superman's consciousness, and when he's freed, they don't go away. Clark knows they weren't real, but his connection and love for his family are still there in his mind. The result is a Superman enraged in a way we've rarely seen before, barreling into Mongol and intent on making him pay. To emphasize the unchained anger of Superman, Moore and Gibbons illustrate a power unleashed that shocks and awes the reader. When Superman yells Mongol's name, it's so loud it fills the panel until it's about to burst. His speed is so fast that multiple panels are dedicated to capturing the split second it takes for him to attack. And far from the jolly Kurt Swan interpretation of years past, Superman uses his heat vision to purposefully hurt his enemy as much as he can. I fashioned a prison that you could not leave without giving up your heart's desire. Escaping it must have been like tearing off your own arm. And now I'm going to kill you anyway. Happy birthday, Kryptonian. I give you oblivion.
Burn.
Moore works to balance the Boy Scout with the God here, showcasing both when the moment calls for it and never calling into question the validity of either. That's a difficult balance for most writers, but it's the hallmark of a great Superman writer. So when Clark battles Mongol with strength that rattles the fortress one minute and uses his super speed to make sure Diana doesn't feel bad about giving him a duplicate gift the next, they don't feel contradictory. They feel like different sides of the same man. But Clark's fury is stopped for a brief moment when he sees his parents holding up Krypton in a statue dedicated to their memory. And with everything he's gone through, it's enough to make him pause just long enough for Mongol to gain the upper hand. Only a timely intervention by Jason stops the tyrant by trapping him in the Black Mercy's clutches. In Mongol's fantasy, he brutally kills the heroes, ravages Earth, and rules the galaxy. A happy ending in the mind of a villain willing to accept the fantasy, while our heroes are left to make the most of Superman's remaining birthday. According to Moore, it was a story for people I've encountered who are fixated upon some point in the past where things could have gone differently, or who are equally obsessed with some hypothetical point in the future where certain circumstances will have come to pass and they can finally be happy. These people are so enslaved by their perception of the past and future that they are incapable of properly experiencing the present until it's vanished. Jason and I brought you this new breed of rose named the Krypton, but, well, I'm afraid it got stepped on and, well, frankly, it's dead.
Don't worry about it, Bruce. Perhaps it's for the best.
Moore's story would see new life in multiple ways in the years after its publication. In 2004, J.M. DeMatteis would adapt the story for an episode of Justice League Unlimited. While there would be some small tweaks, no Robin, earthquake tremors that hint at the Black Mercy's false premise instead of a collapsing society, it's largely intact. In fact, the more idyllic fantasy Krypton means that Kal-El's rejection of the world and his son is even more painful, underlining his inherent heroism. Today, it remains one of the few more adaptations the author actually approves of, allowing the episode to credit him alongside Gibbons. In more recent years, the story was adapted into the CW Supergirl live-action show, providing a woman's perspective on a story that is primarily male-centered in its focus. Kara unconscious, Laura dead, Lila only briefly seen. Moore would have better stories for women in comics, but there's no room given for them here, with Wonder Woman shown as physically capable but not given any Black Mercy insights. Of course, you can't really discuss Alan Moore adaptations and his legacy in comics without at least touching on how one of the most influential comic book writers ever was treated poorly by publishers like DC and completely turned his back on the industry. It seems like everything Moore has ever created will eventually be dragged back into comic books to lend some sort of creative cachet to a story, even though anyone familiar with Moore's relationship to the industry can see that the act itself is exactly what pushed one of the greatest creators of all time to quit. In the case of this story, Mongol and the Black Mercy would reappear in the pages of Jeff Johns' lengthy Green Lantern run, a series that heavily borrows from Moore's work, which Moore would lambast for its unoriginality. But most important is this comic's lingering effect on Superman's perception. Because if Clark Kent's greatest desire isn't Lois Lane or peace on Earth or Luthor in jail, but is instead a completely different life from his own, then it speaks to the humanity within Clark. I speak, of course, in the more broadly applied idea of humanity, not Earth Dweller versus Kryptonian. So many of the shallow critiques of Superman focus on him being a boring and too perfect person. To me, Superman is often the ideal of a person, the wonderful living being we could all become if we self-actualized. This doesn't mean that Superman has no problems or doubts or lessons to be learned, only that these issues are blown up to a massive scale. Yet we can always trust him to make the right decision. Making that decision isn't always easy, and the path to victory is often hard, even for a man who seemingly has everything. But what is more human, more relatably flawed, than wanting what you could never have, and still knowing that it could never be the right choice? Superman's innate rejection of his greatest wish speaks to his heroism being just as central as his beating human heart. The Man of Steel can be broken, but not shattered. And in the world of DC Comics, just like our world, there must always be a Superman, guiding us, believing in us, and instead of being trapped in a past that never was, leading us to a brighter tomorrow. thanks for watching today's video, the first video of 2022. I wanted to give a huge thanks to Eric Azana for providing the voice of Superman. Eric is an extremely talented voiceover actor and the host of the awesome Geeksplain podcast. He gave me the perfect voice that I was looking for the Man of Steel, so please check out his work and subscribe. And it's a video that's brought me back to a couple of topics that I've covered over and over on the channel, specifically Superman and Alan Moore. And while I've done a video on Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, For the Man Who Has Everything has always been a personal favorite of mine. I actually think I watched the Justice League Unlimited adaptation of the story before I actually read the comic, but I love both. And I think that Moore's limited time writing Superman is actually really fascinating, because he's an author that's clearly very disillusioned with the idea of superheroes, and Superman in particular being the archetype that's key to a lot of his larger ideas. And while his Superman stories can be psychologically dark, I think he's actually fairly positive about Clark Kent. So clearly I had a lot to say about this story, and generally speaking, I really wanted to kick off 2022 with a bang, with a big topic, and with characters and a story that a lot of people would be hopefully interested in. The idea for this year is going big. Not necessarily always mainstream, but hopefully, as you'll see in the coming months and videos, big. Big in scope, big in ideas, and big in analysis. So look forward to whatever that might mean for the coming videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts on For the Man Who Has Everything, Alan Moore's career in DC and comics as a whole, and your thoughts on the balance between the human Clark and the Kryptonian Kal-El in the character of Superman. As always, a big thank you to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only audio reviews. Until the next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and watching out for one another. See you again soon.